The blood tax, how Rome forced its own people into slavery. They called it tributum sanguinis, the blood tax, a phrase rarely written, almost never spoken, because no empire wants to admit it once sold its own people into chains. Rome, the city that prided itself on liberty, law, and virtue, built its strength not only on conquest abroad, but on quiet cruelty at home. This isn't a story of foreign slaves, nor conquered Gauls or Greeks. This is the story of Roman citizens, men born free, whose loyalty, poverty, and blood fed an empire that would call them honorable, even as it broke them. This is how Rome turned its sons into servants, and its freedom into a ledger of debt. In the early republic, freedom was sacred. A citizen's body was his own, his rights guarded by law, his honor protected by the gods. Or so the Senate said. But behind the marble speeches and oaths to libertas, freedom, lay a quieter reality. Rome's economy ran on debt. Farmers borrowed from nobles to plant crops or buy tools. When wars came, those farmers became soldiers, and when they returned, their farms lay in ruin. So they borrowed more. This was the birth of nexum, the bond, a contract where a man pledged his own flesh as collateral. If he could not pay, the creditor had the legal right to seize him, imprison him, and work him like an ox until the debt was repaid. It was lawful slavery, wearing the mask of contract, and it would soon consume a generation. The wars of early Rome were endless. Samnites, Etruscans, Carthaginians. The state demanded soldiers year after year. Every campaign drained not just coin, but lives and labor. While the wealthy grew richer from spoils and land confiscations, the soldiers, the small farmers, returned home to find their fields seized, their wives starving, their taxes doubled. And when they couldn't pay, the Republic took what was left, their freedom. That was tributum sanguinis, the blood tax. It wasn't written in any law, but everyone knew it existed. Serve Rome, lose your land, fall into debt, and pay the price in flesh. Rome had discovered a grim equation. The same men who defended her borders could be bound within them. Let's step into one life. Cultus Gaius Fabius, a veteran of the Third Samnite War. He fought for Rome for 6 years. He marched across mountains, watched comrades die beneath foreign suns. When he came home, his farm was gone, taken as collateral for unpaid taxes. He borrowed money to survive, promising to repay when the next harvest came. But the harvest failed. His creditor, a patrician named Publius Servilius, demanded payment. Caius had none. By the law of nexum, Servilius took him, chained him in a workhouse, branded him on the shoulder, a citizen branded like a criminal. Every day he was forced to labor on estates that once bordered his own land. He was not property by name, yet he was property in truth. When he died, there was no tomb, only an entry in an account book. Multiply his story by thousands, and you begin to understand how the Republic grew rich. Rome's lower classes, the plebeians, endured much, but not forever. Riots broke out. Crowds gathered on the Aventine Hill, shouting for reform. The Senate, as always, debated. Some said mercy was weakness. Others feared another secession, the people abandoning the city entirely. Then came the event that shook the Republic. In 326 BCE, a young man named Lucius Popilius was found dead. beaten to death by his creditor for a debt he could never repay. The scandal ignited fury. The people demanded justice, not pity, and for once, the Senate listened. The Lex Politeia Papiria was passed, abolishing the nexum, freeing debtors from bondage. Rome congratulated itself, calling it a triumph of civilization. But what really changed? The chains disappeared, yes, but the system that forged them did not. After nexum was outlawed, Rome found new ways to bind its poor. Instead of physical bondage, there were taxes. Instead of chains, there were contracts. Instead of slaves in name, there were clients, laborers, coloni. Men tied to land they did not own, unable to leave without permission. Generations locked to the soil like roots, a soft form of servitude that history would later rename serfdom. Rome, ever pragmatic, had learned the oldest political trick. If you cannot chain the body, chain the economy. And so the blood tax lived on, invisible yet alive, flowing through the veins of the empire. The poor still served the rich. The soldier still fought for land he'd never own, and the Senate still called it order. Centuries later, as emperors ruled in gold and silk, the same pattern returned. The legions that once conquered the world were filled with the poor, citizens desperate for pay, food, or survival. Their service bought them little but exhaustion and exile. When their usefulness ended, they were turned home to find the same. No farm, no future, no mercy. In the provinces, estates called latifundia grew like cancers, vast plantations run by slaves and ruined citizens alike. The free man had become indistinguishable from the enslaved. And the cruelest irony, the empire now imported foreign slaves while its own citizens begged to be treated like them, because at least slaves were fed and housed. Rome, the mother of laws, had perfected the art of legal oppression. By the late empire, the blood tax was no longer metaphorical, it was literal. The state began drafting not only soldiers, but laborers, forcing citizens to build roads, fortifications, and grain reserves under threat of punishment. Every year, more men disappeared into Rome's endless needs, feeding an empire that could no longer sustain itself. The old proud citizen became property of the bureaucracy. Born to serve, born to pay, born to die for the idea of Rome. In the end, Rome didn't collapse from invasion, it collapsed from exhaustion, bled dry by the price of its own perfection. Empires don't fall when their enemies break their walls. They fall when their own people stop believing in the promise that built them. Rome's blood tax wasn't just about slavery. It was about betrayal, the slow, quiet betrayal of the very citizens who created her greatness. Freedom became debt, loyalty became labor, and sacrifice became an invoice stamped by the Senate. In the end, Rome didn't collapse from invasion. It collapsed from exhaustion, bled dry by the price of its own perfection.